Hello friends, so welcome to this lecture on role-based access in Azure. So in this lecture, we'll try to understand the role-based access, some of the basic concepts, and then the three pillars. So before digging into the further, we already know that role-based access is a kind of security best practice which is followed in the organization that depending on the role of a user, whether you are administrator or you are a backup administrator or you are, let's say, security administrator, depending on the role or the duties which are assigned to you within the organization, depending on that the role should be provided to the user so that he should have access only to the resources which he needs to perform day-to-day operations or his duties. So similarly, role-based access in case of Azure helps the organization or the user to manage the Azure resources and helps you manage who can access these resources, what they can do with the resources, like what users can do with the virtual machines, what can do with the SQL server or Cosmos DB or storage account, and on what areas they are having access to. And in Azure, RBAC is an authorization system basically, which is built on Azure Resource Manager that provides the fine-grained access management of various resources like storage account or a virtual machine or a SQL databases. Like within an organization, if you want, let's say, allow one user to manage virtual machines in one subscription and another user to manage network. So different kind of roles would be required for the users to perform their duties. Similarly, you might be providing access for a DBA group to manage the SQL databases in a subscription, or you might require certain database administration that they can manage the Cosmos DBs only, or the key vaults only, or virtual machines. So depending on that, you can apply various roles within the Azure, or you can use the RBAC in Azure. Now the three dimensions of Azure RBAC. So this is a very important concept on which we should pay attention. So in this case, the three dimensions, like the first dimension is the security principle, then is the role definition, and then we have is the scope. So what is security principle? See, security principle is nothing but an object that might be representing a user within an Azure AD, or a group, or a service principal, or a managed entity. It could be user assigned or a system assigned that is requesting access to Azure resources. It could be your virtual machine, your storage account, or a database. Basically, the user who will be requiring access, or the identity which need access to certain resources. The next pillar we have is the role definition, means what kind of permissions we have provided, means the bunch of permissions, the list of permissions, the collection of permissions which should be provided to a user group or a service principal so that he can perform the task. And it could be a read only permission, write permission, delete permission, depending on the role which he's having within the organization. Like he might be having a security reader role or a security administrator roles, database administrator role, SQL administrator role. There are various roles within the organization. So similarly, we can assign a role definition that what kind of access would be required to perform day-to-day duties. Like roles can be very high level, like the honor role, or a specific like virtual machine reader role or a virtual machine contributor role. There are various kind of roles which we can assign to user so that he can perform his day-to-day operations or the day-to-day tasks assigned. Next we have is the scope. See, the first we know that this is the user or this is the group who needs to access certain, who needs access basically. And then is that this user is having a, let's say, security reader role. Now we have that role. Further, what we can do is we can restrict that. Let's say if there is a security administrator to which all resources he should be having access to, means do we want to provide access onto the resource group or a subscription, right? All these things we can define in the scope. So might be possible that for a certain virtual machine reader or a contributor role, you don't want to provide access onto the whole subscription. You only want to provide access, let's say, to the virtual machine or maximum to a resource group. So by defining the scope, like the area on which that we need to provide access to that security principle, that is the scope. So that is why in order for the RBAC to work, three things are mainly required: that okay, who needs access, and then what kind of role is having. Then we can further apply the scope, that okay, we can define the scope. Let's say access needs to be for a certain subscription, for a resource group, let's say, or for an individual resource. In this way we can provide fine grained access to the resources on the need to know basis or a least privilege basis. So this is it, friends. In this lecture we discussed about the overview about the role based access in Azure, and then the three dimensions or three pillars of role based access in Azure. So thank you, friends. Thank you for watching this lecture. Meet you